And as a thank you for watching this webinar replay, you can take 20% off your entire order at bettersex.com by entering April Webb at checkout. That's APRILWEB.
Welcome, everyone. Thanks for joining us tonight. My name is Betsy, and on behalf of the Sinclair Institute, I'd like to thank you for joining us tonight for our webinar with the legendary Candida Royalle on writing erotica for film. Before we get started, this webinar is being recorded for replay, and to be sure we get the best quality recording, everyone is muted. Please use the webinar features on the right side of your screen at any time to submit your questions for Candida to answer after the presentation. I'll go over really quickly the format of today's webinar. Candida is going to give a brief presentation about writing erotica for film. After that, she's going to answer questions from you, today's participants. And as I mentioned before, you are all muted, but you can submit questions at any time using the webinar features on the right of your screen. So let me tell you a little bit about Candida Royalle. Candida first came in the public eye for her internationally acclaimed line of erotic films from a woman's perspective. Innovating the concept of couples erotica, she created Film Productions Incorporated in 1984 in order to produce adult films that spoke from a woman's voice and could be entertaining while promoting positive sexual role modeling for couples to view together. We have a lovely picture of Candida there, and I would just like to go ahead and turn this over to Candida now. So, thank you so much.
So, hi everyone. Thank you for joining us. It's really fun to do this. I can't tell you how many people write to me wanting to write scripts for adult movies, erotic movies, and sometimes they'll send me movie scripts that they've already done, and I want to talk about that a little bit at some point because there are some very common mistakes that I've seen, and so I hope that I can help inspire you, and help you also avoid those common mistakes. I'm going to do just a really brief overview of what I do and how I came up with the idea, and then how my scripting evolved over time. I will use an example of one of my scripts that I wrote, one of the first real story-based scripts, and then, as I said, I want to just go over some of the common mistakes and why they should be avoided. And so I'll just start by saying some of you may know about me and my work already. Hopefully a few of you have seen some of my work. Basically, I got the idea to create adult movies from a female point of view back in the mid-'80s, when this was really, the female viewer was not even heard of. And but I just, because of the women's movement, and that gave women permission to explore their sexuality, and then the advent of home video, I could tell women were very curious and very interested, and now they had a safe, private place, their own home to look at them in. So, but there was really nothing out there for them. I also knew that men really were interested in finding movies that they could bring home and watch with their women, and there was just nothing there for them that women really liked. So that's what gave me the idea. And I had a partner that I started Femme Productions with, and what we then thought was, well, how do we make them female-friendly and more interesting erotica in general, because I think men wanted something more interesting also. And we knew that the way the erotica was, or the erotic scenes were depicted, really had to be changed, but also the stories. And, at first our idea was to just present common female fantasies with very little dialogue. Everyone thinks that there's not much acting talent in the talent pool for erotic movies, but so we thought, well, let's avoid having to give them many lines to work with and deal with. But what I found in my own observations in looking at some movies that were very erotic back then was, like, Body Heat was one of them, I remember, was that when there is a good story, it actually engages the viewer more. It makes them care more about the characters and what they're doing and why they're doing it. You know, they care about watching it. And I also found that actually there's a good amount of talent out there. What you need are good directors. So after the first 3 movies that we did, my 4th movie was a movie called 3 Daughters. And I'll kind of describe how I wrote that script as an example. But you know, let me just say that when I am preparing to write a script, you know, I was in preparation for this webinar. I started thinking, well, you know, what is it that really inspires me? What, in the first place, what do I want to write about? And I thought, well, the first thing is, you know, I look inside myself. You know, I kind of dig around inside my own fantasies, the things that I like to think about, fantasize, because I really think that it's really good to work from your own life experiences and things that excite you, because if you're just kind of going by what you think people might like, I think it's less likely that you're really going to touch someone. I think if it touches you, there's more of a chance that it's going to touch others. And like, I can't tell you how many companies have come to me and said, well, you know, we did research as to what women want, and this is what we found, and it's almost like they come up with this formula. And sometimes I think that stuff just leaves you cold. I think you have to work very often from your own instincts and you know, what moves you, what would you like to see? And for example, with 3 Daughters, you know, this was a movie that, you know, it's basically, it takes place in the context of a whole family. But it focuses especially on the youngest daughter, Heather, who is just graduating high school and on her way to college. And she's just discovering her own sexuality. And we see her as she goes on to have her first love affair, and she has 2 older sisters, and we kind of get it's almost voyeuristic, which I think people like a lot. They like voyeuristic stories where they feel like they're spying on the people. But her 2 older sisters are more experienced, and they, you know, so we get to see them with their boyfriends, and one has a fiance already. And then we even have a scene between the parents where they rediscover their passion for one another. And basically, this was inspired for me by the fact that I was kind of exploring my own sexuality and dealing with I was looking at a lot of the hang-ups I had, and growing up in our culture where, you know, between religion and a culture that has a double standard, there can be a lot of guilt and shame put on young women as we discover our sexuality and try to explore it. And I wanted to do a story that showed a young woman having her first experience, and without all the guilt and shame, almost an idealistic portrait of what it could be like. So 3 Daughters, actually the funny thing is that I was sitting in my house one day, and I had a neighbor upstairs who played piano, and I was having a very quiet moment, and I heard her through the vent in my house. I could hear her piano playing, and I suddenly this image of a young woman who turned out to be Heather in the story, kind of, you know, laying on her bed reading, and you could hear her sister, who was home from London, practicing piano in the living room, and this whole sort of lovely image came to me, and that's what started me on this story. And then I thought, well, you know, who is this young girl? And I thought, I had this idea to show a young woman coming of age and discovering her sexuality, and so for me it was a way to use my own experience, but also I wanted to show a more positive side of sexuality. And the other thing that inspires me is the desire to give out good information about sex and about how to be together while also entertaining people. So so this led to me writing this movie, Three Daughters, and within the context of the whole family and a lot of activity going on and piano practicing, and Heather kind of, she's influenced by the sexual energy that she, her older sisters are home, and she kind of walks in on one of them and secretly gets to spy on one of them who's more experienced, and so she kind of, learns a few things, and it's all kind of innocent, really, but also very sexy, and so so this led to my first, I call it a slice of life type script, and so the other thing is I wanted to say is that, what led me to want to do more of a story, again, was because of the realization that people become more engaged by the story, and they care more about the characters, who they are, why they're there, and especially, and this is important when you're planning a script for an erotic movie, what would they do in this situation? What kinds of lovemaking would they engage in? One of the things that I find most annoying in typical like, say, porn movies or adult films is that you could be doing a story about a virgin, and as soon as it's time for the erotic scene, she's going at it like a hooker, and it's like, it's just not realistic. And whereas I think it's so important, like in the case of Heather, when she makes love for the first time with this man she gets involved with, I asked her to, act very tentative. Don't be at all forward. Let him lead the way. Show that you're shy and completely inexperienced. And it turned out to be a very touching, sweet scene, whereas her oldest sister with her fiancé is much more experienced. They're very familiar with each other. They're comfortable with each other. It's very sexy. And, of course, when you see the parents rediscovering their desire for one another, it's also very, very familiar, but it has like a different feel to it. There's laughter. They laugh together. So it's very important to, in an erotic movie, so many people try to come up with these elaborate storylines, and then it's time for the sex, and it all looks the same. I think it's so important to vary it and let the characters really lead the way as to who these people are and what kinds of things they would do. I have to say also that I like the set that we're giving away tonight, Eyes of Desire, Parts 1 and 2. It's actually our best-selling movies, these two movies under the Eyes of Desire series. And, I have to say that, again, I think the story was compelling, and also when I was writing it, it was very much influenced by a relationship that I had with someone that was very intense, very passionate. We played a lot with power play and surrender, and it was very exciting. And I have to say that when I was writing and designing the erotic scenes, I wrote them inspired by the kinds of things I did in this relationship, and I got very turned on. And that's a very good sign. I always say it's a really good sign if you're writing a scene and you get turned on. Just like when you're editing, if you're an editor, you get turned on, that's a great, you might have a really good scene there. So, work from who you are, work from what you know, and let that be your guide. And I'm so sorry, there's a phone ringing in the background that should have been turned off, but I hope you can just ignore that. Maybe you don't even hear it. So, so as I was, let me see, now we're going on to, and I wanted to just say that with the Three Daughters movie, I was very pleased with it because it was so personal for me that it really did come through, and people were very moved by it. The response from viewers led it to be our biggest seller for quite a few years, and it got an endorsement from ASECT, which is the American Association of Sex Educators, Counselors, and Therapists. They felt that it promoted positive sexual role modeling and they screened it at one of their national conventions. So I was very pleased with that. And now I want to just go over what I think, what I see as the biggest mistakes that people make, and in the scripts that people send me and hope to get turned into a movie. The biggest mistake is not being aware of how the kind of budget you have to work with. People send me these incredibly elaborate stories, and the reality about erotic movies is that most of them have very small budgets, very tight budgets for you to work for it. Now, on the one hand, it's said that when you're coming up with a movie, you shouldn't edit yourself, and you should just, let your fantasies go. Just go ahead and put it all down there, and don't restrain yourself, don't edit yourself at first. Just let it come out, whatever comes out. But then you have to go back and really think about, is this an affordable movie with the kind of budgets we're looking that we have to work with? And now you may not know what kind of budget, but maybe, just assume that you're going to have a tight budget, so that, you have to think about where the money is going when it actually goes on to screen. A lot of the movies that I see, the scripts that might come by me, call for really superior acting, way too much dialogue. There's just way too much dialogue in there, and way too many setups. They're big, elaborate, fancy setups. They're big party scenes, or, lots and lots of scenes, lots and lots of dialogue. You need to leave plenty of time in a film script for an erotic film for the erotics. You have to leave a lot of time. Each erotic scene tends to be at least between 3 to 7, sometimes even 10 minutes, depending. And, so that means that you have just a limited amount of time to build up a story. And your story should really just be, it should really be just a foundation, something that ties it all in together. Don't try to go for an Academy Award-winning script here. What you really need is something that holds the story together, that shows that there's a purpose to this. Who are these people? What is their story in the simplest of terms? Like for Three Daughters, it was a very simple story. Young woman is just blossoming sexually. Her 2 older sisters come home. One comes home from college. One comes back from London where she's working. They end up, she kind of gets influenced. She feels the sexual energy in the house. There's a big dinner that's thrown welcoming because 2 of them are, the oldest daughter becomes engaged. The parents throw this elaborate, wonderful dinner. And one of the groom, the boyfriend, brings a friend along for the middle daughter. As it turns out, it's the youngest daughter who they end up connecting, and then they start to date, and by the way, there tends to be a desire for the scenes between women, and you need to be careful. I think you have to be careful with that, because a lot of women really like to see scenes between women. A lot of women are uncomfortable with it. My policy is I only put those scenes in if there really is a reason for it in the story. And I try to cast women that really also are bisexual and are really into making love to a woman. I hate gratuitous scenes of any kind. I really want them to have a purpose. So in Three Daughters, in my own experience as a young woman, I had a friend, and we kind of explored sensually together. And I know that a lot of girls, young women, do. And so I show that in the movie. Both of these, they have to be of age. If it's an erotic movie, everyone has to clearly look as though they're at least over 18. And there's a scene where Heather and her girlfriend end up kind of fooling around. One says, and Heather is curious because the other one has already made love, and she, it's like, oh, what is it like? And they kind of do a little feely, touchy stuff, and so there's a reason for it in the movie, and I really did have that experience. So it wasn't just a gratuitous scene, and I think it's really more effective when it's like that. Again, when it comes from your own life, your own experience, your own inspiration. So getting back to, again, I was giving an example that this is a very simple story. It's just something that makes it more interesting to watch, but you're not sending them around the world. You're not doing some big elaborate story. It's going to be too much, too expensive, because where does the money go? The money goes, first of all, it really goes to setup. You have to remember that when your script gets translated to a shooting script, that you have to remember that now they have to set up lights and cameras. So for every single, I think for every single scene that you have to portray, or every piece of dialogue is another, is for another, they have to set up the camera, they have to set up the lights, they have to change everything around. So every time you have people talking, we have to do all kinds of establishing shots, a medium shot, a tight shot. And so you need to make it as simple as possible. Not too much dialogue, not too much of an elaborate story. Remember that people are looking at these movies because they're erotic. They want to be turned on. They want to be inspired. And you don't need to do big elaborate stories. You need to do something that holds their attention, that engages them, and that presents a reason and a purpose to show some really beautiful eroticism. So I think, Betsy, how are we doing on time? Let me know if you want me to stop at some point. And yeah.
We're doing well on time. We've got time for more. If you want to go into a little more detail about some other stuff, we've got about another 10 minutes or so. You can.
Oh, good. Okay, great. Yeah, because I want to really elaborate more on that. Again, just so you all understand, it's always good. And the other thing is this: if it's at all possible, I think it's not bad to take a really simple film course or just read up on it and understand even vaguely the process of making a movie. Just like I tell directors, if you have any hope to direct, you really should also know what it's like to edit, because then you understand what's needed in the editing process. You're a much better director if you understand that when you set up, like say you have a scene and you have two people having a conversation. So what you've got to do is you have to, when they're shooting this, they have to set up what's called an establishing shot. So they'll do a big wide shot of these people in the room, and they'll film all of their dialogue. Then they have to go in and so that you have things to cut back and forth to in the editing room. You have to then do what's called a medium shot. So you come in tighter on the two people talking. Then you have to break it down even further, and you do close-up shots, and you have to do all the dialogue that one person has in close-up. Then you move the camera and the lights around, and you do the other person in close-up doing their dialogue. So this all has to be shot just for this one scene of these two people talking to each other. And it really takes a lot of time. So for every scene you've created for this movie, they have to find a location, they have to go in and dress it, they have to then go in and set up all the lights, which take time if you want it to look really beautiful. And then they have to set the camera up along with that, with the lights, and then they have to do all of those different perspectives, the establishing shot and the medium shot, the close-ups. And every time they do those, they have to move the cameras and they have to readjust the lights. That's why it's really important to keep it simple. Keep it simple. And so and it's also about the POV of each character. You want to get their reaction shots, their point of view, and so once and I'll also explain. Anyway, just to tie that up, again, the more elaborate the story, the more locations will be needed. Each location requires you to gather up your cast and your crew and all your equipment and move to that next location, and then you have to do all that setup and everything again. So I will say that it is recommended that you always provide at least one scene that's an exterior, that's outdoors, because it gives your movie kind of a sense of breathing space. It's not, you don't have to, but it's always a good idea. Another thing that I've challenged myself to do at times is to actually tell my story completely through visuals without any dialogue at all. And that can be a real challenge to just really tell the story with very little dialogue. The third movie I ever did, was called Christine's Secret. There was very little dialogue. It was a simple story of a beautiful woman who would go to this inn out in the country and stay there by herself. And the innkeeper, this chatty woman, talks about how she just doesn't understand why she comes there alone, why doesn't she have a boyfriend, and then we have these lovely scenes. You get to spy on all these other people that are at the inn on their honeymoon or whatever, and then you learn at the end that the reason she's there by herself is that she's having a secret love affair with the caretaker of the grounds, and she doesn't want anyone to know. So it's the simplest of little stories that just kind of ties it in together, and very, very little dialogue. So it's kind of an interesting thing if you can come up with an interesting story and tell it almost completely in visuals. It can be very, very beautiful. And the other thing is when you write an erotic scene itself, of course, you want to leave something to surprise. You're hoping that your talent will bring something to it. But you do also want to script out the kinds of things that you think they would do that in that situation. And with typical adult films, unfortunately, the way the erotic scenes are shot very often is they have almost like a checklist of the kinds of sex acts that they have to show in the movie. And so they'll set up the lights and camera and they'll show oral sex, and then they'll change it all around, they'll stop it all, and everyone waits and they reset it, and now they're going to do intercourse, and then they set it up for something else. The way my partner and I started to shoot was we threw all of that formula stuff away, and we just once I would work with the talent and tell them the kinds of things that I'd like to see, depending on the role they're playing. We would then just let them go, and I would kind of stand by the camera and very softly whisper direction to them, and just kind of be as inobtrusive as possible, and just really let them go. But we would talk about the kinds of things they would do first. So hopefully the kind of movie that your script will go to will be for people that really let the story, let the lovemaking just go once they start the cameras, and it doesn't have to be this formulaic thing. But it's really good to, when you sit down to imagine that erotic scene, just remember who these people are, and let those characters guide you, but also let yourself open up and bring something of yourself to it as well, because I think that would guarantee a lot more heat and passion in that scene. So that's kind of all that I really want to say at this point. And my favorite part is always the Q&A. So I would love to open it up and see if there are any questions that I can elaborate on.
All right, I'll send them over to you now, Candace. Can you see them?
Okay. Now I see um, there's a question here. Am I saying scripted from the heart and embrace the script with reality, or vice versa? And that's let me just, I guess I am. I think I'm saying both. It's scripted from the heart, but, again, bring in the reality of what these people would be doing, and also, I guess, the reality of knowing that you're probably going to be someone's going to have a very tight budget to work with. And so it's kind of taking it a little bit of each. Okay, here's a question. Women tend to be attracted to erotica, whereas men are for physical aspects with little dialogue. Is the film industry trying to mesh the two so that they don't turn off women but also can hold a man's attention? In other words, have couples interested in watching films together? Foreign films seem to do this well. Well, I know that that's certainly what I set out to do. And actually I heard this a while back, and I thought it was really so true. Like, why are men and women's fantasies so different, and what influences them? And when you think about it, for women, because we've always, well, let me start with men. Because men are expected to woo the woman, to take her to dinner, spend a lot of money, then, take her out, nice dinner, and then they get home, and then you have to seduce her and all of this, so that their big fantasy is to find themselves with a woman who just, can't wait to get him and just wants to drop to her knees and swallow him up, and, he doesn't have to worry about what she wants. She's just there for him. That's his big fantasy, because it's not usually the reality. And for women, because men would just like to, forget about the dinner, forget about the seduction, just do me, women long for that seduction. They long to be taken out and have some romance and all of that. And so, I think that's why they have such different fantasies. But I think actually that when it really comes down to it, I don't think men and women are all of that different. I think that the men I know really would like to have erotic movies that are more interesting and more intelligent and more sensitive. I get so many letters from men that want something that is, more romantic and more respectful and more tender. And then there are some women who just want it really down and dirty also, not all women want romance. But I think for sure the film industry is definitely, if they're smart, they're definitely trying to mesh the two things so that they can have men and women both watching. And indeed, I guess there are more foreign films that do this much better than we do here. But I think maybe we're starting to catch up a little because people are opening up. And so, hopefully, we'll see more of that. Okay, so here's another question. Are the actors invited to view their performances, comment as to their reality, and if so, is it followed? I'm not sure I understand that. No one really gets to view their performance. I will say that it sounds like you might also be asking, do we listen to the actors as well? And I know that I am very open to seeing and hearing what the actors and actresses would like to do and the kinds of things they enjoy. I love for them to work as a real couple, but we don't really have that time on the film set to let people look back at their performance. Plus, again, you're working on very tight budgets, which means that you don't have a lot of leisure time at all. I'll tell you the contrast between a Hollywood budgeted film and the amount of time that's allowed for, like, say, a 2-minute scene. They will spend an entire day shooting 2 minutes of footage on a big budget feature in Hollywood. And there are adult movies that the entire movie is shot in a day. And so this is the reality that you're dealing with. Now there really are two kinds of erotic film industries, though, I should point out. There is the adult film industry that you hear a lot about, I guess they're porn movies. I like to think that my movies are, I like to call them sensuously explicit, in that they are explicit, but they're much more sensual. I don't have those terrible, unattractive money shots. And they're just much more tender. It's not just wham, bam, thank you, ma'am. It's not like gymnastic sex. But they are adult movies, and so there's the adult film industry, but then there's also the erotic film industry, and that can be the kinds of films that you see on Showtime, on the Oxygen Network. These are erotic movies, and they're non-explicit, and they definitely have bigger budgets than the adult film industry. So an adult film industry budget could be as little as $30,000. A good budget, really good budget, might be $100,000. Not that many directors get that budget. There are occasionally people that even get $250,000 for a movie. But in the erotic film industry, where you'll see, like I said, Showtime, Oxygen Network, that kind of quality, that tends to be softcore, and it's very glossy, very beautiful people. I think sometimes those are less exciting because the people they're not always comfortable with what they're doing, or they're not really making love, and you can sometimes tell that they're not. They look a little stiff. They're more posing than anything. But, you do get a better talent pool in a way, and you get more money. So you have to decide exactly which of those industries you're looking to get into, that you want to sell your work to. Here's another question. With the rise of tube porn and free amateur porn, what do you think is the role of scripted, highly produced erotic films? Well, I'll be very blunt here. I think there's no role. I think that tube porn and free amateur porn don't even think about trying to sell them scripts because they don't use them. And if they do have scripts, they're so minimalist. They're practically, the pizza guy knocks on the door and comes in, and the girl thinks he's really cute, and there you go. So unfortunately, with the rise of tube porn and free amateur porn, there's also less work for script writers. And so that's why you either have to find people like myself who really go for making serious adult movies, or you go into the next echelon, which is the erotic industry for Showtime or Oxygen or whatever. And I have to say that I tend to work from my own scripts, but I know that there are filmmakers that do work from outside scripts. Here's another question. Do you need to submit the story as a screenplay or just a story? Well, I think you definitely have to be able to do a real screenplay. And you don't, what's very good to do when you submit something is to have to first just do a small synopsis. A very brief one-page synopsis is always very helpful. And, you reminded me about something else that I want to point out. First of all, you do want to learn how to write a real script. And there are lots of programs. There's great programs online now for script writing. They're great. All you have to do is purchase them, and the whole setup is there for you. And oh my gosh, there's a really popular one, and I'm sorry, the name of it is eluding me. I can't think of the name, but they're very they're just, you know, you go online, you can find them. Just put in script writing programs, and they do it. They lay it out all for you. It makes it so easy. It's very important that you know how to write a real script. You want to submit a professional-looking script, or no one's even going to read it. The other thing too is that you want to ask permission to send someone a script. You don't want to send it cold. Most people won't even read a script that's sent to them unsolicited, because there's too many cases where people have come after a director and said, I sent you a script 3 years ago and this is just like mine, and I'm accusing you of stealing my script. So people want to avoid that. You want to either have an agent that represents you, or you send a letter ahead of time asking permission to send them a script. Okay, and here's another question. What kind of heroines do women most want to see? Specific archetypes that are most popular? Well, you know, I think women want to see heroines or other women that they can relate to. I think they want to see women who, again, they want to be able to relate to them. I hate watching a movie where you've got this little girly girl, you know, who's like a little baby voice, and she's got, you know, augmented breasts, and everything about her is kind of fake, and she's just there to please the man, and no personality. I want to feature women that look like they're intelligent, that they have real lives, real concern, real issues, just like the rest of us, so that, you know, we can explore. Like there's a movie I did called Bridal Shower, and all it is it's a group of women who get together to celebrate a friend getting married. And one of them brings over a big basket of sexy toys and movies and stuff, and so they all get to talking about how they get their partners to make love the way they want, because it's very hard for women to ask for what they want. It's a real simple storyline, but these women, you know, I get teased about this, but these women are, you know, they're all professional women in there. One is in pre-med school. Another one is becoming a social worker. There's another one who's, oh gosh, I can't think of the rest of them, but they're all professional women. And I think that's what women want. They want to look at characters that they can relate to and who remind them of themselves. Okay, here's another one. How do you balance keeping a film commercially viable with your feminist goals of being inclusive of bigger body sizes, alternative sexualities, breaking stereotypes? Very good question. Really good question. I get asked that a lot. You know, I try very hard to, and it is a balance, by the way. You really are, you're having to strike a balance. It's not easy, because I want to show women of all ages, all types. I hate the ageism in Hollywood and all of our media. I hate that women are supposed to be perfect and young and beautiful and thin, you know, and so, but I've also, it's like the more you veer away from kind of a mainstream look, the smaller your audience becomes. And so you don't want to end up way over on the fringe. So I think you have to make up your mind. Who is your audience that you're looking to go after? And you know, are you, who's someone that's directing for that audience that you can write for? I mean, there are a lot of movies now that show all kinds of different women, different body types. Like there's a huge community out of San Francisco where there's just, you know, so there's a lot of much more large women, you know, beautifully curvaceous women. I started a line that is more of a multi-ethnic movie, and so, you know, I think it requires you to go out and look at what's there and who's making the kind of movies that you would like to write scripts for. You know, go to someone like, go to the women's websites and look at the kinds of movies that they're selling, and who those directors are. I think women lesbian movies have much more variety in body types because women aren't as demanding in that way. They're much more open and accepting to different kinds of women, different kinds of body types. The heterosexual market is pretty strict, but again, I think it requires you to go and research and see what's out there, what's being made, and where you think you could fit your stories in, who you might be able to write for. How competitive is this writing market? Are there realistic opportunities? I would have to say off the top of my head, I would imagine it's fairly competitive because I think so many people want to do it. But, I don't think that should discourage you. I think the opportunities are there. It's a matter of you seeking them out, seeing who's out there, again, what kind of movies are being made, where you might be able to fit in your writing talents, and just work on it, I think just probably it has to start with your ability to come up with interesting, truly erotic, sexy stories, and then learning how to translate that into a film script. And, look at the movies that are out there, watch the kind of dialogue, and see who's making those kinds of movies, and then just go for it. Don't be discouraged by whether it's competitive or not. If you have a talent for it and a passion for it, you can be successful whether it's a small or a competitive market. The opportunities are out there. So, here we go. Here's another one. Why are couples not shown undressing each other to a greater extent? Well, I think that's lack of imagination, probably, whether it's in the writing or the directing. I think that it's, I think that even in Hollywood movies, I see this. It seems to me that every time there's a sex scene in a Hollywood movie, they're just, suddenly, it's like they're just ripping each other's clothes off. Even, oh God, I have such a bad memory for names. There was one of the Academy Award movies this year. I can't think of it. I'm so sorry. But it just, again, the couples, when it's time to make love, they're like ripping those clothes off, and it's just such a shame. I just think everyone thinks that sex is frantic, and, once you realize you're going to have sex, you can't stop yourselves. Instead of just slow down the pace, make that part of it. You're absolutely right, the undressing, it should be part of the seduction. And by the way, also, here's another thought you might consider. Try working in safer sex, That's a big controversy in adult movies. And, I know that a lot of the companies don't want to utilize safer sex. My company's been doing it since the late 80s. And there was one scene we shot that my friend Veronica Hart wrote and directed for Femme Productions, where this couple are getting ready to get it on, and the woman takes out a black condom and she puts it on him as part of the build-up, as part of the foreplay. She does it really sexy, and it's like, it's a great thing to show because it also shows people that this can be part of the fun. So, try that if you're writing for an explicit movie, and maybe let the director have something to work with, a reason to incorporate the safer sex into it. But I think you're right. There really needs to be inspiration to take their time and, maybe write into one of the scenes, describe them undressing each other, and give the director a reason to stop and take time and show that. It could be a great thing. So here's a question. Do you have any difficulty finding male actors who are happy to perform in female-friendly erotica? Oh, On the contrary, men are thrilled at the idea of performing in a female-friendly erotic movie. They love the opportunity because they know, at least this is my experience, they know that for me, the women are not the only stars in an adult erotic movie. The men are just as important in my movies. And they know that they're going to get to be featured. They feel that for them it's an opportunity to show what great lovers they can be. And they know that I really care about that. So they just love it. And I can usually have my pick of the male actors. They love the opportunity to show how much they truly love women and what great lovers they are. So not a problem at all. Not a problem at all. Okay, last question. Why don't they make any more erotic movies like Emmanuel, like the movie Emmanuel from the 70s? Well, you know, I think they, boy, that's a good question. I mean, I think they do, but you're not seeing, they're maybe it's not standing out as much because erotica it's not as taboo as it was in the 70s. In the 70s, it was such a taboo that a movie like that was so unusual. But since then, there have been a lot of erotic movies, and so it's not something that's talked about as much, and it doesn't get the same amount of attention. But, you know, it was a big deal then. Emmanuel was a very big deal back then. Just in the same way that when I started my femme productions and back in the mid-'80s, I would say for about 15 years, I must have been on every talk show on TV because it was still taboo. It was still nearly unheard of. It was so outrageous that a woman was doing this, starting her own company and directing these movies. But now, you know, I'm hardly ever on TV anymore because it's, you know, it's just everyone accepts it. It's, you know, it's just, it doesn't get talked about as much. So it's the same thing. It's not as taboo and outrageous, so it just doesn't get quite the same attention anymore. But hey, you know, come up with a really fabulous script. Now remember, that one was a non-explicit. And so come up with a fabulous, nearly explicit movie, maybe that just borders that, you know, on that line. It just straddles that line there. Come up with something really gorgeous and unusual, and maybe you'll come up with the next Emmanuel. You never know. You never know.
I just want to thank everybody for joining us tonight. Candida, it was fantastic to have you on the line. It was a really enlightening experience, and I really appreciate you taking the time.
Thank you.
Our audience really seems to have enjoyed it, and I just want to thank everybody for joining us again. Thanks for all your lovely comments, and we'll talk to you soon. Have a good night, everyone.
Good night, everyone. Sweet dreams.